Well, it's another episode here with Wake Up with KC, and today I'm going to talk about a topic that is becoming more of an awareness. It's narcissism, narcissistic behavior, narcissistic patterns, characteristics. And how do you even know if you were brought up in a narcissistic environment, in a relationship in one? And how do you overcome? How do you change that? Even heal from the patterns and the cycles from it. Today, I have Dr. Rita Louise joining us to discuss this. Rita, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I think I loved your intro because I think that's what a lot of people wonder. There is so much awareness of coming forward about, narcissistic behaviors, narcissistic mentality. And I think, it's something that I'm going to plant a little seed for maybe later. I feel like young people today are becoming more and more narcissistic. And we can come back to that if you want to, because I think that there's the pattern with, like that adults are seeing, but I feel like it's becoming even worse with kids.
Well, I've always said, if you don't learn your history, you're destined to repeat it. And then I also talk about emotional energetic traumas.
Mm-hmm.
Does narcissism sort of go with the emotional energetic traumas that plays out? And it's like a behavior, a pattern. It's actually an energy on top of that keeps, it's like a vicious cycle.
Mm-hmm. So I work as a medical intuitive and energy healer. So that's my day job. And then I write and do all this other stuff I like to say for fun, and people look at me weird, but for fun. And, and so in my work, one of my observations of people that have, well, actually, let's start here. People that are narcissists tend to be very self-serving, and they are only looking out for themselves and their self-interest. And so where it becomes a problem is that if you allow them to get you to change your mind, to get you to feed their self-servingness. And so narcissists tend to align with people that tend to be more empathic. They tend to align with people that are people pleasers, and have many times, you are a people pleaser or a codependent because you've had early childhood trauma. And so you come to the table with this wounding of wanting to take care of the other person, and the narcissist also has wounding, but the way that they deal with the wounding is different. The person that tends to be, and I'm just going to use empath to kind of mean, sensitive, codependent, people pleasing, showing the fawn response. I'm just going to clump that all into that word. But the empath, when something has happened, they are more likely to take responsibility for what happened in that situation and look for ways that they can learn, heal, and grow and overcome what's happened. So they tend to be more into self-help, or more into, again, even just taking responsibility and feeling bad and guilty about it. Where a narcissist, it's like they can't do it. They can't, it's impossible for them to self-reflect. And when they do self-reflect, they just kind of look at the surface and don't look at the wounding that's below it and think that they're just fine, and don't really care what, is going on with the other person. So.
Wow. So, what are some of the characteristics of a narcissist and their behavior as like their self I want to say self-absorbent or
Mhm.
self-centered. So what is your perception of them?
Okay, and so there is the narcissist in general, and where it really comes to the front is the narcissist in a relationship, and more importantly, in a romantic relationship. That's really where it becomes a lot more evident, but people that are narcissists, and I think everybody on some level has met people that are narcissists, and there's two different kind. There's grandiose narcissists and there are covert narcissists.
Can you
So
explain?
I'm getting there. Yep.
Okay.
But, because they're so different in their approach. Okay, so I have a history, and I don't care of sharing this. I have a history of getting into relationships with narcissists. Bam, that's where this all started for me. And so, but I never got involved with a grandiose narcissist. Well, all right, not for a really long time. So, a grandiose narcissist are those people that are bigger than life. They were the quarterback for the high school football team, and they're talking about how great they are 50 years later. They're punt, pound on their chest and show everyone how good they are, how smart they are, how kind they are, or how gentle they are until they go home and beat their kids. And so one of the things about narcissists, there's what they present to the world or present to you if you are in a not tight committed relationship, and what they show behind closed doors. But the grandiose ones are, loud. And I think everybody has had someone in their life at some point in time that was a grandiose narcissist. They just talk about themselves and again, how great they are. And that's usually the dead giveaway. It's like, oh, okay, he's pretty full of himself. Ooh, narc. The covert narcissists are a lot harder to spot. They tend to seem like they can self-reflect. They tend to seem like they have feelings, that they can be emotional. Like this one gentleman that I dated, he would get very emotional about things and cry. I mean, he cried way more than I did. But when I really started looking at it, he would only cry because this situation here that you think he's crying about was actually triggering something from his childhood. And so really he was just crying for himself or about himself and really didn't care about this other situation. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
They can be, they can get on themselves. They can act like they're very spiritual and calm and collective. But again, one of the characteristics of a narcissist is that's the facade they show. Um, you hear stories. I mean, this hasn't been my experience, but you hear stories of these, churchy people, where the father is a deacon at the church and everybody loves him and he's so kind and caring and sharing. But at home, again, he beats his wife, beats his children, has a drinking problem, and but no one knows it because he keeps it so well hidden, and that's the mask. They put up this front and make people think, hey, this is a great guy, but the reality is not really. And so, and where that comes out and why I kind of say, there's their casual relationships where it's easy for them to keep the mask up. If I only have to be around these people 8 hours a day, I can be totally fake. It's when you're with someone all the time that it becomes a lot more challenging, especially like you move in with someone or you marry someone. Now you're with them 24/7, and it becomes next to impossible for them to keep up this false front of agreeing or having patience or whatever it is you needed from them, because that's one of the things they do is they look at you and go, oh well, this is what this person needs, And so now you're attracted to that because it's like, wow, I had this need and they're just really satisfying this need. And then after a while, they'll just take it away, and because it wasn't really important to them, and yeah.
Well, what about like, I've had this experience, so I was just wondering, like where they show kindness, and then when you're in need, they're right there to help you, but then later on, they throw it over your head after all I've done for you.
hmm but see, you're kind of lucky that they were there and were kind to you. Mine normally I would need them and they would emotionally disappear or get drunk or whatever they would do, but it would be like, oh, I get to deal with this crap by myself, or I'm having this issue going on and you're going to just sit there and beat me up about it, even though what I really need is your emotional support. But I mean, that's just how it manifests, and usually when they do that, throw it out, it is a kind of a one-upsmanship thing,
Mhm.
because now I'm better. Well, I helped you with that. I mean, like
Mhm.
my most recent narc that I got rid of, I did all kinds of stuff for that man. I mean, I could make a list. And he looked at me like I didn't do anything. And I said, well, I make dinner every day. But I mean, I make nice dinners and I didn't cook every day, but I made sure food was on the table. So whether you call that cooking or not, I don't know. But I also did all this food prep, all the shopping, all the planning. And that was just one of the things that I did. And but he mowed the lawn and I was supposed to pay him for it. Pay him. He lived in the house. I'm like, are you serious? I mean, there's some really sick puppies. I hope you're listening too. Sorry. Ah.
So you have a book that just came out, this the dysfunctional dance of the empath and the narcissist. How did this get created?
Okay. So there's the one that I just made the comment about, but then there was the guy I dated before that who, I'm going to be very kind, because he had issues. Okay, I'm just going to say it that way, and he also had a drinking problem, but I think he drank to self-medicate the issues. But when it was like, I have to make up a name because I always like would, if it wasn't Psycho Ben, it was like Good Ben. And I really loved Good Ben. But Psycho Ben was freaking Psycho Ben, so it was just really challenging. And when he was in that psycho place, he became very narcissistic and, I'm going to say abusive, you know.
Yeah, they get emotionally and verbally and mentally abusive.
Mhm. But how much was his psycho? How much was him being drunk? I don't know. I never got the opportunity to separate those. So when I broke up with him, that's when the word narcissism was really starting to come to the forefront. And so I started digging into that. And one of the things that I came to realize was that pretty much all of my really close adult relationships were with narcissistic people, and that my mother was a narcissist as well.
So it goes into the female as well.
Well, I mean, it's a non-gender specific situation, where it becomes more challenging for women. And I see this a lot. I belong to several narcissistic support groups online. Is, and if there are young women listening, I'm just going to say this to you. Or if you're older, anyone, it's like, don't be dependent on some man for your livelihood. Because one of the things that I have seen over and over and over, this has never been my situation, but women that go, they have kids, they stay at home, and now they have two babies, and they realize that they're with a narcissist and they don't have a way out. You need to make sure that you're taking care of you. So if you're home taking care of those babies, be in school, have a part-time job, work from home, something so that you have some kind of financial independence and you're not trapped. That's the part that hurts so much. There are these women that are trapped because they have nowhere to go, no car, no money, no nothing.
Oh yeah.
And just don't let that happen. If there's any way possible, don't let that happen to yourself.
Oh, and I know that feeling. I've been there, and it is hard. And you feel trapped. Like I was at home for 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
an at-home mom, a wife, trying to take care of the house, take care of the kids, make sure they did their homework. If they were sick, I became nurse. We wear many hats when it
Mm-hmm.
comes, you know? And it's like I noticed behaviors and I'm like, you know what? I got to the point where I was like so done. And all the beliefs, because it stems from religion too.
Mm-hmm.
How a woman should be, how she should dress, and you know she's below the man.
Mm-hmm.
Because they got this God here, man here, woman here, and then the children. And then the man is the breadwinner, the man is the head of the household. So I'm like, um something doesn't feel right about that.
Well, and it doesn't protect the women. And so if you're in a situation where there's, I mean, emotional, financial, abuse is horrible. It's
It
just
is.
horrible. But in a situation where there's physical abuse going on top of that, and you're in a situation like yours where you're the stay-at-home mom and you don't have those resources, I don't really get the impression that the church is going to open their door and help you in the way
Oh
that
no.
you
It's
need.
you just need to get on your knees and pray. God is in control. He's going to do. And I'm like, I've been putting up with this for like almost 10 years being married to this guy. Are you serious? Like, and then I had this one woman say something, a quote from Ephesians, where, well, the woman is supposed to be submissive or submit to the husband. And I'm like, even though what he's beating the shit out of you, like, really? Something ain't right with that. Like, and it's a
It is.
program. They take the word literally, and I'm like, I don't think that's coming from God.
I don't think so either.
Oh, but it was Holy Spirit filled. And I look at them like, I'm Holy Spirit filled, you're Holy Spirit filled. Anybody could write that shit.
Right. But, if your husband isn't being, I'm going to say, godlike or Jesus like, and is being more devil like, then why should listen to him? I mean,
Yeah.
they just sit there and go, well, he's a man. It's just like, yeah, but he's not a God fearing man. He's an evil man.
It's like these misconceptions, I call them.
Hmm.
And I think some of the men that were writing those and copywriting, like they were plagiarism from other writings.
Hmm.
I think that they were coming from that narcissistic energy, if you want to call it.
Well,
Because it was all about control, intimidation, putting fear, manipulating.
hmm but in, I'm going to say, more advanced ancient cultures, if that makes sense, the women were in charge.
Oh yeah.
And so even though the man might have been the chief, but if the women, the older women didn't like it, it wasn't going to happen because you want to have bread to eat, you better just like not do that. So they had their ways um, of dealing with that.
And I know I spoke earlier about that, because I study history.
Hmm.
And then it just because I asked a question and I started questioning everything because being intuitive, an emotional intuitive transmedium, because I channel, the ancient civilization beings and highly evolved beings. I might not understand the language when they come through and speak through me, but it got me questioning, like, where did language come from? How did it begin? How did people communicate at the beginning?
Can I just say aliens?
Yes, thank you, Anunnaki. So here's the interesting part, because when I started the ancient civilization on the Sumerians and whatnot, I came across the Anunnaki, and come to find out, they were like different race of beings, just like us human beings. We have white, black, Asian, Latin. It's the
I
same
mean,
with them. And there was female. There was Ninhursag,
mhm.
who was connected with Inky in helping create the human sapiens. Well, I come to find out, reading Ambarambi's Code of Law, she actually reigned and was the administrator until he removed her. And I'm like, wait a minute, Ninhursag was actually alive, living, residing on Earth.
She might have been the deity that they prayed to, but I don't believe that she was actually at that point in time a corporeal being.
It,
I mean,
it was
if
like,
you
I
sit
found it
there,
fascinating. Like, and was she resided and she stayed as an administrator back then, until Ambarambi removed her and put somebody else in, a man. Gee, go
always.
fig.
Um,
But I found that fascinating because I was like, wow, women did play, especially these, what they called gods. And I'm like, knowing what I know now, I can imagine what they were thinking when these aliens came from the sky in their little shiny ships,
mhm.
thinking like, oh God, there's God from the heavens coming down. And they wind up worshiping him. It's a cargo cult.
But I'm going to throw out something at you. Okay, so I've written 2 books kind of on that topic. One is E.T. Chronicles: What Myth and Legend Has to Say About Human Origins. And then my other one is called Stepping Out of Eden, that talks about humanity's journey and evolution, where I actually talk about the development of language. But if you look at the mythic record, okay, just in and of itself, we find that there's 2 different categories of myth. There's what I call old myth, which goes from like in the beginning up to around the time of the flood. And then we have what I call later myth, which is from the flood and moving forward. And so Hammurabi would be in that later mythic period, where when you talk about Enki or Tiamat or Makabo, who's Native American, or Zeus, they all exist in the early myth. And so I believe that, some of our first encounters and where we learned language, from the aliens, was during that first period of the mythic record. Because if you look at the stories are, this god is fighting this god, and this one has an affair, and this one gets pissed off, and it's the stories of the gods. It's like sitting there and taking a camera into Harlem or downtown Chicago, and but you're part of the gang, and they let you in and you can like film it because you're part of it. Versus when you look at later myth, there's humanity and there's God. And so if you think of the story of Moses, there's Moses and there's God, or the Trojan horse story,
Elijah.
well, that's biblical, the Iliad, which is
Oh,
Greek, and so the whole thing starts because Paris, who's a human, has to decide which god is the prettiest. but it's his story. When you talk about Moses or Elijah, it's their story, and God is separate. They have an interaction with God, but it isn't the story of Moses hanging out with the gods and they're making bread and they're, you know what I mean? Where the earlier ones, it's the gods hanging out with each other.
Wow. Well, I think Moses met up with an alien and it wasn't God. You know, come
Well,
on.
I think that there's like the big G God, that we channel and communicate to and get in alignment with. And then there's everything else that they talk about in myth, which we're not that kind of God, because why would you need like chariots, or why would you need the technology that is clearly stated in myth, if you were omnipotent? I joke around because people just kind of don't get it sometimes. It's like, so do you ever watch like Star Trek Next Generation? I always have Star Trek examples, sorry.
No, but I saw
Well, when I'm talking
that
about the gods, it's
my
just
Star Trek
easier.
was with Captain Kirk, and Spock as in
Okay,
like in the
the
70s.
original
Yeah.
Star Trek. Okay, so but in the Next Generation, there is a character called Q. Okay, so not the political Q, but Q, and he's omnipotent. And he liked to torment the captain of the ship, by doing inane things. And so there was one episode, I don't even remember what was going on, and he snapped his fingers and he changed into a Star Trek uniform, and there was a mariachi band playing on the bridge, and they were going, and then he got mad and he snapped his fingers again and they disappeared. Now that's omnipotent, to be able to sit there and wiggle your nose, or drop your head, or do any of these things where we can make things appear, make things disappear, send us off into space, create humanity just by snapping. That's omnipotent. But when you read the stories from myth, that's not what you find at all. You find genetic engineering, you find them making this technology. I mean, there was one group that was responsible for making the Vimana and for making these weapons that the gods carried around. And it's quite, it doesn't tell you how they made them, but it is quite clear that they were manufactured.
Yeah. And you know, um I've been reading George Smith, who in the 1920s discovered the cuneiform writings.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is Zachary Sitchin.
Sitchin. Mm-hmm.
Sitchin. I'm always like messing up on that
Yeah,
last one.
yeah, me too. I always get them backwards, but yeah.
And I find it fascinating, the Lost Book of Inky and then the 12th
But
Planet.
all right, so I was a big Sitchin fan until I was working on my ET Chronicles book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I became a not fan, like a hardcore not fan. I mean, he put forward some interesting stuff. Um, all right, I'm going to write a note because I want to come back to this. Hang on, Lost Book, Anki. So in my book, the extraterrestrials came here for some reason,
Mm-hmm.
and it's pretty clear in the narrative of looking at myths from around the world that they came here. Well, first they went to a different planet, but there was a catastrophe that happened there and a war. And so a spin-off group came to Earth and settled it. And but why were they out in space in the first place? That was the question. And so according to Sitchin, they were looking for the gold. So I spent literally a month, 10 to 12 hours a day looking for the gold. And I couldn't find it. I couldn't find it in Sumerian tablets. I couldn't find it in anybody's mythic record. The closest thing I could find was the story of the churning of the Milky Ocean, where they talk about getting Amrita, the nectar of life, from the depths of the earth. Now, could that be a correlation to some kind of gold? Maybe. But that was the only thing that I could find that had to do with mining or gold or, and then there's this other person. I'm going to be nice and not mention his name, but would talk about monatomic gold, and that the gold was the elixir of life. So again, we have that same narrative. And, and he said that they had found this white substance, this monatomic gold, in a cave in Saudi Arabia by Egypt, somewhere, I forget exactly. And so, I mean, I dive deep, and if you're going to tell me something that I can't find references to, then I want to see your source of where you got your material. And so, he said, oh, well, this archaeologist, he's the one that found it, and he called it was just 4 letters, because in Hebrew, or not Hebrew, but Egyptian, there's no vowels. And so it was like, I don't know, I have no phonics skills, so I was calling it Mithka. I don't know. And so, but I'm looking up these 4 letters trying to find out what it actually translated to. And I finally found somewhere that said that it meant precious metal or turquoise. And this was on an Egyptian site, and I'm digging hard. It took me forever to find that translation. Then I find a copy of the book that he supposedly, got this source from. And I'm reading it, and he was in Hatshepsut's turquoise mine, okay, Mithka, precious metal or turquoise, in her turquoise mine, and found this one chamber that had white powder all over the place. It didn't say it was monatomic gold. It just said white powder. Well, how do you get white powder and make it be monatomic gold when this guy's already been dead for forever?
Right. Wow.
So that's my little warning. And my comment about the Lost Book of Enoch, that it's a fictitious book.
Oh, Enoch? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are a lot of people that are like, no, it's on the tablets. It's like there aren't any tablets. There's no tablets.
No, it's just like all the other scriptures that you see, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and First and Second the Thessalonians, and First and Second King, and all that other stuff. It's just an author.
Okay, but there are a lot of people. More so in the past, that took it as scripture and held it up and said, "Oh, it's in the Lost Book of Enki," and I'm like, "Yeah, but in the introduction."
Enoch or Enki?
Huh?
Enoch or Enki?
Lost Book, isn't it the Lost Book of Enki?
Well, there's the Lost Book of,
that's the Sumerian, this Zachary LaPlant one, but I think it was in the introduction or in the first chapter, and I swear, because I kind of have a photographic memory, it was like the second to last paragraph that says, I've taken all this material, that I've collected over the years and made it into a narrative. And so people were like, no, it's from the tablets. I'm like, dude, go to the second to last paragraph in the introduction that tells you that it's fiction.
Wow. Because I have, let me see if I find it. Is it? No, Stage of Time. I got George the Chatelains of According to Genesis. And it looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a little confusing to me because I'm like, huh? What?
But see, if you read all of his other books, this is like the holy grail of the story. But what it feels like is that he wrote his collection of material and then put it together in a more palatable narrative that people can sit there and follow along, like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened.
Wow.
But I don't remember if it was the introduction or the first chapter, and it's the second to last paragraph.
Well, the one thing that I find fascinating in reading them, I'm like, man, this is like a soap opera with these people, these beings.
But that's how that early myth is all like. It is all like that.
I'm like,
You know,
holy
and I
crap.
joke around and go, what we find in early myth actually does parallel what you find in the Bible from in the beginning to the flood. But you can only have one God. And so, in order to make it work and keep some of the stories, you had to take all of the myth that had multiple gods in it and get rid of it.
Mhm.
And so it became a very much abbreviated form. Would you like an example? Because this one kind of blew me away.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, so in Genesis, on the third day, God creates the plants and trees and puts them on the earth, which doesn't really make sense because it's not till the fourth day that he puts the sun, the moon, the stars in the sky. So how could you have plants with no sun, moon, and stars? Doesn't make any sense, And so I was like, maybe the days got met backwards. I proposed because prior to the sun, moon, and stars being in the sky, all of life was underwater. That's where all the fishes were and the sea stuff. Then we have plants on land. And so now we also, as part of that sun, moon, and stars, we had life emerging from the sea. So maybe that's why it was done in that order. But regardless, it doesn't really make any sense.
No.
Why we have plants and we have the sun and the moon and the stars. However, if you look at myth around the world, there is always stories of some kind of a terraforming event that occurs. And then the next thing is the sun, moon, and stars are put into the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And so they parallel. And it's the same, it doesn't really kind of make sense. Narrative.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a big maybe there are some ties between what's going on in the early part of the Bible and what we find in myth around the world. Kind of that plagiarism thing, you know. I
Yeah,
mean, they all pretty much tell the same story.
pretty much so. And what I find fascinating is that, you know, now understanding about narcissistic behaviors,
Hmm.
they even had it.
They were bad. They were really
I
bad.
was just like reading and going, "Are you kidding me?" Like, oh my god, I'm seeing it now. Like how human beings are reacting, um with this separation and division and hatred, and
Hmm.
that's how they were.
I mean, I think that when we talk about the stories of the gods, we are talking about the elite. We're not talking about the common man. I mean, did you watch like Game of Thrones?
Yes, I did.
So,
And
we're just talking about the royalty and that whole thing, so like the king's brother is maybe not going to put up with a whole lot from the king, but that king can be extremely narcissistic to anybody that is of a different rank, and so even with the gods, there were ranks. There was, the sister of the main god, but then there was like this guy over here that was still a god and was still like part of the court.
demigods,
Uh-huh.
because they mated with the human
Hmm.
female, so they became demigods. Then there was a controversy and confrontations of who got the heir to and the title of being able to whatnot. And I was like, oh my god, like this is insane.
It is insane. It
and
is insane.
and the thing about it is you talk about the elite, in Hammurabi's code of law, he had categories, you know, the ones that owned property were higher class. Then you got the, I guess, the commoners, the employees, and then there were slaves. So there's like close to 300 laws, and it was significant in what the categories to based on where you were at. So I was like, wow, that's interesting, because now we got the rich, the middle class, and the poor. Property
Hmm.
owner, commoner employee, and then the slaves.
Hmm. But slaves back then were not like we seem to think of slaves that were in the South. I mean, they were just more, I'm going to say, indentured servants, and could have jobs and, live a life, but, they just were owned. I don't know. It's just a weird concept. But one of the things that I found interesting, and I forget, it was in the Stepping Out of Eden book, was that in the Code of Hammurabi, it talks about healers. And there were three different kinds of healers. There was one that was kind of like a medical intuitive that could diagnose. There was one that cast out demons and did, got rid of spells and any of that, like, witchy, psychic-y kind of thing that was going on. And then the lowest paid and the most, regular were the ones that set bones and made herbal preparations. So of the three levels, they were of the lowest rank. And today we put them at the highest rank.
Wow. And then what happened, if that existed and that was going on, then what the hell happened to where you couldn't do any healing, and what, like, the upper two categories sort of got suppressed, persecuted? Like, when did that all shift and change then?
I mean, I would, I like to put my finger squarely on the dark ages, where if you stepped outside the book, I like to say it that way. If you stepped outside the book, that you were a heretic and you needed to die, and so, and that went on for 1,000 years. Think about how much memory is lost by the common people. And it's just amazing that anything to move forward in Western society through that. When it's interesting, slightly different story. When I was writing my alien books, I thought I was going to be presenting this book to humanity. And the reality was that I was really presenting it to the Western European Judeo-Christian mind, because Native Americans believe in sky people, Australians believe in sky people, Indians believe in gods that live in multiple level universes. We're the only idiots that don't believe it.
I'm just like, they had the carvings in the caves, in these caves that, all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's that book that they continuously to read and believe, and don't even, like, they're so close-minded. It's beyond me.
I live in Texas, and so I have a number of friends that keep inviting me to Bible study, and I'm like, I'm a freaking heretic, come on. And I have other choice words that I refer to myself as, but I'll just use that one. And so I had this one friend that said, because I'm like, I just don't do that. I don't do Jesus. He was a great guy. That's as far as I go. And she goes, well, maybe you should do some research. Maybe you would change your mind. And I'm like, research what? I go, there's one book. I go, how can you research outside of one book? She goes, but there's plenty of people that have written stuff. And I'm like, right, but they're all referencing that one book. It's not like this person's writing about this over here and it ties into this, or, it's just one book.
It's once you awaken, you never go back.
No.
And the sad thing is like, the truth is inside us.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to go inwards and let it, like, discover it. Self-discovery, self-realization. And I just, like, have hopes and put my positive out there. And that's why I have this show, is to talk about this, to get people to start thinking outside the box.
Mm-hmm. I was just having a discussion, so I had a new question come up for me. So I was driving, and I like listening to talk radio, but it was Sunday, and so there was, and I live in Texas, so there was nothing on other than church radio, and and so this guy actually gave a pretty good sermon. I actually got something out of it. I mean, because I can't sit there and say that, holy words and spiritual words are not holy or spiritual words, if they come out that way. But what I found interesting was that before his sermon, he prayed, and then after his sermon, he prayed. And I posed this question to my girlfriend. I said, well, his prayer was, dear God, so now he's talking to the big guy, and he like lays out all, like have compassion on the people and blah, blah, whatever his whole thing was, through Jesus Christ. And I'm like, well, why do you even have to invoke him? Why do you have to bring Jesus into this whole conversation? It's like you're already having a conversation with God. I didn't get it.
Yeah.
You see where I'm going with that? It's like now if you said, oh, Jesus, help me with this stuff, but people don't even do that. They go to, oh, God. They say, oh, God, and then it's like in Jesus' name. I'm like, well, okay, see, I joke around. See, I feel like I can say this to you. I'll tell my girl, like, I have a great relationship with God. And if I need something, I go right to the big guy, and I don't go to Junior. And I go, and even in your prayers, you're going to the big guy, and then like throwing Junior in there, like, is the at the
Or
end.
what is it? Dear Heavenly Father,
Big
you know,
guy. Yeah.
or uh,
But it
you
always
know,
ends in Jesus' name.
like dear Lord Savior, da da da. And I just like, I don't need to go to church. I am God. I'm a divine spiritual being, sexual being inside this human being. I just happen to be a female with female parts. That's
Mhm.
it. I'm God experiencing life in this human being. And it's funny. Now I can say this to you. Um, it's funny how you ever watch the show Lucifer?
I love that show.
Oh my god, I love. Did you see the episode where he gets so mad about everyone saying, "Oh God, oh God." He goes, "I can never escape him." And he goes, and then there's like having sex, and he hears a woman moaning, "Oh my God, oh God, oh God, oh my God." He goes, "Even during sex, really?" Like it was hysterical. And then I started thinking, I'm like, yeah, we sort of, men and women sort of do call out God when they're about to experience that orgasm,
Uh-huh.
Sort of, like when I saw, like, realized that, I'm like, holy shit, he's right. We do.
Mhm.
So, one final thought. I love having these kind of conversations. Regardless, there's something that I read, and it's so like profound, and I want to give hope, to others that have, listened about this interview. You wrote, regardless of what happened to a person when they were young, they have the power to redefine themselves and their life. It is possible to break free of these destructive, negative patterns and finally experience the loving, healthy relationship that they've always desired. And Rita, from personal experience because it's happened to you. So I want to encourage everybody that would like to contact you. The information, even your book is listed down below. So I want to thank you for your time because I know you have to get going. You have an appointment, but thank you for this amazing experience in this moment in time with you.
You are so welcome. I had a really good time. So, and just as a little plug, people can get my books on my website, which is soulhealer.com. And there's a ton of articles that are on there for free. Um, I do charge shipping on my books, so you can get them cheaper on Amazon. But any book that you buy directly from me comes autographed. If you are a trauma survivor or would like, some counseling, coaching, intuitive insights like, is he really a narc? You can set up a time and schedule a session with me. So that's always, and you can do that through the webpage. But after that, all my books are available on Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble, etc. The regular places.
Well, I look forward to getting an autographed copy of your book.
Okay.
Thank you again. It was a pleasure.
I had a really good time. So thank you.
Well, there you go. We started talking about narcissists and aliens and religion. We even got God in this conversation. I love these type of conversations. So you got to stay tuned. You never know who I'm going to get on my show and what I'm going to talk about. Until then, see you next time.